Joseph Bowne Elwell was born on February 24, 1873 in New Jersey, USA. He was the son of Joseph Elwell and Jenny Elwell. Elwell was a student at Phillips Academy, Andover in Massachusetts. While still in his teenage years, he left school and took a job as a clerk at an insurance brokerage firm. He eventually became an insurance agent. During his time attending services at the Tompkins Avenue Congregational Church, he persuaded the pastor to establish a young men's club. Among the club's activities were whist drives, where Elwell discovered his remarkable skill in the card game of whist, which was popular in the 18th and 19th centuries. His talent did not go unnoticed, earning him the nickname the Wizard of Whist. He also picked up bridge-whist and began playing for money. Elwell was soon spending more and more time playing cards and less time selling insurance. In 1900, he got married to Helen Darby, and both came up with the idea of earning income by tutoring others in the intricacies of the game. And so Elwell began making additional money by teaching people in high society how to play. A growing number of them were women. He also wrote instructional books such as Elwell on Bridge. Throughout this time, Elwell began investing in racehorses and real estate in Palm Beach, Florida. He developed a reputation as a ladies' man, and in 1916, he and his wife separated. Their 15-year-old son, Richard, moved in with his mother. Elwell had become quite wealthy and successful in speculation, owning a yacht, 5 cars, and a stable of over 20 racehorses. By 1920, he was seeking a divorce. A few weeks before he visited the Ritz-Carlton Hotel, he offered his estranged wife an increase in her allowance from $200 to $350 in exchange for her agreement to the divorce. He also promised to make generous arrangements for their son. Helen Elwell had yet to respond to his proposal. On June 11, 1920, after enjoying a night of dining and dancing at the rooftop restaurant, Elwell left the Lewisone party around 11 p.m. and went to the New Amsterdam Theater to purchase tickets for Ziegfeld's Midnight Frolic for the 5 of them. His friends joined him just before the curtain rose at 11:30 p.m. Following the show, the Lewisones, along with Krauss and Figueroa, took a taxi from the New Amsterdam Theater and headed home around 1:45 a.m. After making plans to meet up with his friends again later that afternoon, Elwell returned home alone. He lived in a 4-story house with a granite facade, part of a row of 8 similar houses. Inside, the vestibule stretched about 4 feet and led to a glass-paneled door that opened into the main hallway. On the right, just 8 feet from the inner door, was the drawing room. From the hallway, one could see into the drawing room through a long mirror positioned above an open fireplace. Elwell usually arrived home at about 1 a.m., woke up at about 8:30 a.m., and ate breakfast. Then he generally went to visit his broker to check on his stock transactions. He didn't tend to eat his other meals at home unless women friends came to visit. Just before going to bed that night, he removed his false teeth and toupee, as he always did. He wasn't expecting any visitors at that late hour. Milkman Jost Otten climbed up the front steps at about 6:30 a.m. The double doors were unlocked when he opened them and dropped off a pint of milk and a half pint of cream inside the vestibule. He pulled the door closed behind him and continued on his delivery rounds. The mailman arrived with the mail nearly an hour later at approximately 7:25 a.m. He usually shoved the envelopes under the storm door, but since it wasn't locked that morning, he tossed about 4 letters inside the vestibule and closed the inner door. He rang the bell twice to indicate that he had left mail. When Elwell's housekeeper, Marie Larson, arrived around 8:35 a.m., both the storm door and the inner door were locked. She used her key to let herself in and entered the vestibule. After closing the doors behind her, she walked down the hall to the kitchen with the milk and cream. At that hour, Elwell was typically still asleep. She took off her outer garments and then returned to the drawing room to tidy up before he called for breakfast. As she was about to enter the room, Larson realized she was not alone. Typically, Elwell did not wake up until after she arrived. The previous morning, when she came to work at 8:30, he had been sitting in his armchair, reading the morning mail and newspapers, dressed in black slippers and a black and purple housecoat over red silk pajamas. This time, however, a barefoot Elwell was seated in an upholstered chair, still in his red silk pajamas. Larson apologized for intruding, but he did not respond. Then she noticed he was bleeding from a bullet wound in his forehead. The back of his chair was pushed against the wall, his chin resting on his chest while the back of his head was pressed against the chair and the wall. A bullet was lodged in the scattered plaster about 3 inches above his head. His arms rested on the sides of the chair, and a partially opened letter from horse trainer Lloyd Gentry lay on his lap, stained with drops of blood from his wound. An envelope and 3 additional letters were at his feet. Elwell's eyes were closed, but his eyelids fluttered as he struggled to breathe, and his gaping mouth revealed only 3 teeth. Larson hurried outside and immediately spotted the milkman, Otten. She asked him to get a policeman, but he didn't move from his cart. Panicking, she ran down the street to the drugstore at the corner of Broadway and 70th Streets to fetch patrolman Harry Singer. She informed him that she needed an ambulance and suspected that burglars had shot her employer, recalling that 3 men had been arrested about a year earlier for attempting to break into the house. Singer accompanied Larson back to Elwell's home, where he quickly examined the body and assessed the scene. There was no sign of a gun, and the housekeeper confirmed that she hadn't seen one or touched anything in the room. Initially, Singer believed that Elwell had shot himself. He stepped outside and asked Otten to find a vehicle to transport Elwell, and then returned to help move him. "Give me a hand with this fellow. He can't last much longer," Singer said. Otten rushed inside, and he and the patrolman were about to lift Elwell, who stood 6 feet tall and weighed approximately 185 pounds, when the officer noticed the bullet wound in Elwell's head. He then discovered a .45 caliber cartridge shell on the floor and decided to leave Elwell where he was. This was not a suicide. It was an attempted murder, he concluded. Singer called Captain Thomas F. Walsh at the police station to request an investigation. Walsh and several detectives arrived just minutes before an ambulance from Flowers Hospital arrived. Elwell was admitted to Bellevue Hospital at 9:20 a.m., but there was little that could be done except to keep him as comfortable as possible until he passed away about an hour later. Meanwhile, the investigation into Elwell's murder was already in progress. Chief Medical Examiner Dr. Charles Norris arrived at the house shortly after Elwell was taken to the hospital. He examined the room where the victim had been shot, and by the time he returned to the morgue, Elwell's body had already been brought there. Norris performed an autopsy, which revealed that the bullet had entered Elwell's forehead, exited through the back of his head, and lodged in the wall behind the chair where he had been sitting when Larson found him. The medical examiner noted that it was unusual for such a wound to be self-inflicted. Elwell had been shot while seated, causing him to lose consciousness immediately. It was estimated that he had been murdered between 7:30 a.m. and 8:50 a.m. Based on the nature of the wound and the time he survived in Bellevue Hospital, Norris concluded that the shooting likely occurred 10 to 15 minutes before the housekeeper arrived around 8:35 a.m. It also appeared that the gun had been fired from no more than 3 feet away. Considering the position of Elwell's body, the medical examiner determined that he was likely caught off guard when he was shot. Captain Walsh, the senior detective at the precinct of the New York Police Department, took charge of the investigation. He was perplexed by the absence of a weapon. Additionally, something else struck him as odd. When police questioned neighbors, no one reported hearing the fatal shot or noticing anything unusual. This included 2 painters who began working next door to Elwell's home at 8 a.m. that morning. Otten, the milkman, told police that he neither saw nor heard anything out of the ordinary that morning. He did not see anyone near the house during his milk delivery or when he passed by again while delivering to the house across the street. Given that the room where Elwell was shot was only 8 feet from the sidewalk, Walsh wondered how it was possible that no one heard the gunfire. Perhaps the sound had been muffled, he reasoned. Despite the lack of a weapon, detectives considered the possibility that Elwell had shot himself. Grains of powder found embedded in Elwell's forehead and face covered an area with a diameter of 3 inches. Police conducted ballistics tests at their headquarters using a Colt .45 automatic pistol to fire at blotter paper from various distances. The cartridges were loaded with smokeless powder, similar to that which had killed Elwell. Investigators aimed to determine the distance at which the powder produced the same pattern observed on Elwell's forehead and face. Their tests indicated that the absence of powder burns suggested the gun's muzzle was held more than a foot away from his forehead when the trigger was pulled, effectively ruling out suicide. Conversations with Krause and the Lewisons further indicated that Elwell had shown no signs of distress. As Elwell's father, 82-year-old Joseph E. Elwell, stated to the New York Times, The fact remains that the pistol used to kill my son was not found in the house, nor is there any evidence that my son got up from the chair where he was seated at the time of the shooting. Even if he had managed to get out of the chair to dispose of the pistol, he could not have hidden it in a way that would evade detection after such a thorough search by the detectives over the past 36 hours. News of Elwell's death spread rapidly. Within hours of his body being discovered, a woman arrived at his house and rushed upstairs. She intended to remove her belongings to eliminate any evidence of her prior presence, but quickly changed her mind when she spotted detectives on the second floor. By that time, Larson had already found and hidden a pink silk gown, a cap, and slippers, later admitting to police that she wanted to protect the female owner from unwanted attention. At noon that day, Viola Krause called Elwell. They had planned to accompany Selma Lewison to her house in Elwood Park, New Jersey, to play golf that Friday afternoon and Saturday. Elwell had asked them to contact him about the pickup time for the trip. Krause was calling to inform him that they would pick him up at 2:30 p.m. However, a man answered the phone, but it wasn't Elwell. "If you're a friend of Mr. Elwell's, you need to come here immediately," the man told Krause. Confused by the cryptic message, she listened as he added, "Mr. Elwell is very, very sick and needs your help right away. He wants you to come at once." When Krause and Selma Lewison arrived, they found crowds of reporters milling around the house. Detectives questioned the two women and learned that they had last seen Elwell at 1:45 a.m. in front of the New Amsterdam Theater. They wondered where he had been from that time until he was discovered at 8:30 a.m. The police decided they needed to retrace Elwell's movements. They canvassed taxi companies to investigate the calls received between 11:30 p.m. on Thursday and 8:30 a.m. on Friday. They received several reports detailing Elwell's whereabouts between the time he left the Lewisons and when he was shot. One report indicated that he took a taxi to the Montmartre restaurant on Broadway at 50th Street, where he was met by two men and a woman. Another account described Elwell stepping out of a high-powered greenish-blue racing vehicle at 3:45 a.m. in front of his home, waving goodbye to the driver before he drove away. This version was initially considered the most credible by the police. Taxi driver Edgar Walters then came forward, stating he had picked up a fare around 2 a.m. They stopped at 66th Street to buy a copy of the Morning Telegraph, the newspaper favored by racing fans. A copy of that newspaper was later found on the floor beside Elwell's bed. Walters and his fare continued to 244 West 70th Street, leading police to conclude that Elwell arrived home at 2:30 a.m. Viola Krause informed police that she had called Elwell at that time. True to his usual bedtime routine, he changed from his dress clothes into pajamas, removed his false teeth, and took off the toupee that covered his balding head. This led police to wonder if someone else had arrived at Elwell's home at 3:45 a.m., as a witness had suggested. However, the driver of the noisy vehicle that dropped someone off at that time never came forward to identify himself. They considered, but ultimately dismissed, the theory that Elwell had someone in his home for a few hours before his murder, as he wouldn't typically allow anyone to see him without his toupee and false teeth. Detectives searched the house for clues. The silk sheets on Elwell's bed were undisturbed, indicating he hadn't slept there, although it was hot that night, and there were signs he had slept on top of the covers. Several cigarette butts were found in the bedroom, suggesting that he, and possibly someone else, had been smoking there. It appeared he had come downstairs barefoot and in pajamas to check the mail. It's possible that whoever was watching the house entered at that moment, or perhaps Elwell had left the front door open to cool down the house. Police questioned neighbors to see if anyone had been seen entering or leaving the Elwell residence after he returned home, but no one had witnessed anything. The police were also trying to uncover the motive behind Elwell's murder. Robbery seemed unlikely, as $400 in cash and jewelry valued at over $7,000 were found on a bed in his room, appearing untouched since his return from midnight frolic. The police inspected the doors and windows, finding no signs of tampering. The room where he was found was not lavishly furnished, despite Elwell's wealth. It contained 3 paintings of little value and a small wooden frame displaying Rudyard Kipling's poem, If. Detectives found no evidence that a racetrack feud was a motive. Assistant District Attorney John F. Joyce stated, "Everyone says he was generous in all his dealings on the turf and had no enemies there." as he told the New York Times. When Larson discovered Elwell, she noticed that a second chair was positioned in the middle of the room instead of its usual spot, suggesting the murderer may have sat there before shooting him. To Elwell's left was a letter he had received that morning from Lloyd Gentry, his head trainer at the Latonia racetrack in Kentucky. The letter provided a brief update on the condition of several horses and the associated expenses, showing no signs of alarm or financial trouble. Friends and police suspected that the shooter was someone closely acquainted with Elwell, and that he was likely speaking to this person at the time of the shooting. As William Barnes, Elwell's secretary and valet, told the New York Times, Mr. Elwell was murdered by someone he knew well. The killer either entered the house with a key previously given to him by Mr. Elwell or was let in by Mr. Elwell just minutes before the shooting. Chauffeur Edwin Rhodes mentioned that several women had keys to Elwell's home and used them freely. However, police were unable to locate any of these women. A few months prior, 3 men had broken in through the basement door at 3 p.m., but a neighbor spotted them and alerted the police. A locksmith informed the police that the locks had been changed in December, and the only 2 sets of keys issued afterward were for Elwell and Larson. One thing was clear: Elwell enjoyed the company of women. Police discovered a pink silk negligee in a closet, with the owner's tag removed and neatly folded inside a gray, unmarked cardboard box. Initially, Larson claimed she had never seen any of the women who visited Elwell and did not know the names of his female friends. However, after further questioning, she admitted that a young woman had visited him several days before the murder. She described her as short, plump, young, and attractive, with dark eyes and hair, wearing a gray suit with fur trim. Larson had prepared a lunch of chops, tomatoes, and strawberry shortcake for them. After spending several hours together, a taxi arrived to take the young woman away. Another woman, whom Elwell had met in Palm Beach earlier, was also trying to contact him before the Saratoga racing season began. All the women were questioned, but none seemed to have any connection to Elwell's murder. Given Elwell's reputation as a ladies' man, friends and police theorized that a wronged husband or a protective father might have been responsible for the crime. District Attorney Edward Swan told reporters, "There is no indication that this crime was motivated by gambling or financial issues. It appears to have been committed by a man instigated by a woman or seeking revenge on her behalf." Neighborhood gossip suggested that a jealous husband had threatened Elwell's life. Investigators learned that about 10 days before his death, Elwell had spent 2 weeks at the Latonia racetrack in Kentucky, where he met a woman named Anna. Detectives traveled to Lexington after hearing that Anna's father or brother had threatened to shoot Elwell due to his relationship with her, but they found no new leads and returned to New York. Initially, police believed Elwell had been shot with an Army-issued .45 caliber weapon. The cartridge found on the floor near the fireplace was sent to William Jones, a former captain in the NYPD and firearms consultant. He determined that the marking REM-UMC on the cartridge indicated it was from the Remington Arms Company. If it had been U.S. Army ammunition, it would have displayed the arsenal's initials and the date of manufacture. Jones concluded that the cartridge had been fired from one of 3 possible weapons: a Colt revolver, a Smith & Wesson revolver, or an automatic Colt pistol. The fact that the cartridge was ejected suggested the weapon was an automatic, which ejects a cartridge after each shot. He also noted that none of the 3 weapons could accommodate a silencer. While a woman might not typically own such a weapon, she could potentially fire it if she had experience. Police considered the possibility that Viola Krause's ex-husband, von Schlegel, might be involved, especially since he had seen his former wife with Elwell the night before the murder. Could jealousy have been the motive? They searched his apartment in the Knickerbocker Studios and found only a dusty .38 caliber Colt automatic on a shelf in a closet, a gift that had not been fired in years. Von Schlegel was then brought to the 3rd floor of Elwell's residence for questioning, unaware that Assistant District Attorney John Joyce was interrogating his ex-wife and the Lewisons on the 2nd floor. He claimed that after his evening at the Ritz-Carlton, he dropped off his female companion and arrived home around midnight. His boss, Andrew Bruton, had asked him to attend the Master Car Builders Convention in Atlantic City the next day. Ironically, von Schlegel's car needed repairs before the trip, so he took it to a garage on 58th Street between 5th and Madison Avenues to fix the ignition. On the morning Elwell's body was discovered, Ellie Hope Anderson met von Schlegel for breakfast at his apartment. She arrived at 8 a.m., and they began eating 10 minutes later before she returned to her hotel. He packed his things and went to the garage around 9:30 a.m., corroborating his alibi. Another woman questioned during the investigation was Polish Countess Sonia de Sinzwaska. She and her sister, Amelia Hardy, had been good friends with Elwell, but hadn't seen him in over a year. They had heard that Elwell, a member of the American Protective League, was responsible for detaining the Countess as a suspected spy during the war, although they did not understand why he would do that. He had successfully lobbied officials in Washington, D.C. to have her released after 2 months. After 16 hours of interrogating people who knew Elwell, Assistant District Attorney Joyce confessed to reporters that investigators were struggling to find clues, motives, or suspects. "We haven't learned anything that sheds light on the case or points to any individual," he stated. "All our leads lead to dead ends, and we seem no closer to solving the mystery than we were when the murder first occurred." Elwell's murder created a stir beyond just front-page headlines. "We have received stacks of anonymous letters, each naming someone against whom the writer held a grudge," District Attorney Swan stated. "It seems nearly everyone with a grievance has tried to point us toward the Elwell murderer. All kinds of respectable individuals who never even knew him have been mentioned." These letters consumed investigators' time without bringing them any closer to solving the case, much like a man who claimed to be the murderer. On April 11, 1921, Roy Harris, also known as Benny Leonard, confessed to killing Elwell. However, his fame was short-lived. His wife informed police that she had been with him all day and night during the time of the murder. Fingerprint experts collected prints from tables, doorknobs, and other surfaces throughout Elwell's home, but found no useful information. Swan was perplexed by the murder, telling reporters, "Boys, it's the mystery case of the century." Elwell was buried in Vallow Cemetery in Ridgewood, New Jersey, on June 15, 1920, and his killer was never caught.